again, because I didn't think we needed this advanced stuff on it. So David, we're at what, about 8:03? Eric is going to try again.
Okay.
You're in. Erica, you're in. You're good.
Yeah, she's also got her phone on as well.
Oh, you shut your phone off so you don't echo when you speak.
No, they're both muted.
Hear
I've got them both
Okay.
muted.
You're good.
So good morning, Chamber members. David Dietz here, chair this year of the Suburban Chamber of Commerce. I am so glad that you are with us for what promises to be a fantastic first Friday. We're going to get cranked up right now with some housekeeping, and then we're going to introduce our great speaker. Our great speaker has a hard stop at 9, so we're going to be prompt here. Before we move further, our activities this morning and for every first Friday would not be possible without the generous sponsorship of our sponsors. And so who are those sponsors? Well, we've got a couple platinum sponsors. That would be Atlantic Health, parent of Overlook Medical Center. Thank God for them, and thank God for your sponsorship. That would also be Kika Fitness, who I think is probably running in a difficult situation here, but we thank them and all the good stuff they do and for their sponsorship. Then we've got our gold sponsors, which include some very active chamber members. Let's start with Barbara Lewis Holmes. Barbara Lewis is also vice president of the chamber. Thank you for your sponsorship. We have Davies Insurance. And of course, we've got Bob Davies as our treasurer. Thank you, Davies Insurance and Bob Davies, for your gold sponsorship.
Thank you, Dave.
We have Bassett Associates, your friendly downtown Summit landlord, represented, of course, by the tireless Beth Welsh. We've got CWI Designs. They're over in New Providence, run by longtime chamber leader Gary Kapner. You would also have as your gold sponsor Point View Wealth Management, which is the firm that I operate here since 1993, since 1995 here in Summit. So thank you to all of our sponsors. Now, of course, we are a networking organization. And before we get to the meat of today's presentation, we're going to give an opportunity to each one of our members who's taken the time to join us to wish us good morning, give us your name, who you represent, a one-sentence update as to what's going on. And I am going to start with the top row, Bob Davies.
Bob Davies at Davies Insurance Management in New Providence.
Marcella?
Oh, we're going around. Okay, good. Good morning. And I'm Marcella, Vice President of Client Engagement for Lakeland Bank, and we are proud sponsors as well as for First Friday.
Karen Hadley?
Morning, Karen Hadley, Executive Director, Chamber of Commerce, and that's my pretty picture for the day. It's better than what would show if I put the camera on me right now. Good morning.
May?
Now unmute you.
I'm trying to unmute her. She's
May,
not
you're
letting
on
me do
mute.
it.
May, unmute yourself and intro yourself.
There she goes.
May Friedel, Passion for Spices. We are food educators. We have an organic line of spices. If anybody wants to learn about food culture, we are there for you. And my business is starting to pick up. I'm getting a lot of calls, so I'm very thrilled.
Good news.
Great. Who's next here? Eric?
Ike Lev from Baron Technologies. I saw this on the web and thought I could join in. We're based in Elmwood Park, New Jersey, and we're a small boutique IT service company providing cybersecurity and IT management for a number of businesses throughout New Jersey. Just wanted to see what the conversation was about, if I can lend some details as well, I'd love to do that. And, we're looking for to potentially join various organizations like this to help with the cybersecurity discussion. And, we're also seeing indicators of businesses getting back to business here in New Jersey. Looking forward to it and wishing everyone the best.
Thank you, Eric. Oh, we got a financial services vet, Bob Compatiello. Bobby,
How are you?
good, speak up.
Good. Hey, 19-year summer resident.
Bob, your mic is not working.
Bob, speak louder, fix your mic, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with my mic. My bad.
Shout, okay.
How about now?
Yeah, good.
Oh, great. Thanks, guys. New member, first meeting, 19-year summer resident. Just joined Edward Jones Financial. Happy to be on board. Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. Melanie Cohn, unmute.
Melanie Cohn, Executive Director of the Visual Arts Center of New Jersey here in Summit, and just happy to be here. We're a studio school and museum, and we will be doing summer camps thanks to the governor starting in early July. So we're pretty excited about getting back going.
Great news, thank you, Melanie. James Kwan.
Hi, I'm Jim Kwan from ACE Pension Solutions. I work with employers to create the optimal retirement plan for them and their companies.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank
Roger Maynor.
Good morning, everybody. Roger Maynor, Linda Berry McCormick, Estabrook and Cooper, the Summit office. We have been fully open and functioning throughout this, although mostly working remotely. And it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's very nice to see everybody's face this morning.
Good to see your face, Roger. Erica's iPhone. Unmute.
Good morning, everyone. Marcella, thank you for the invitation this morning. My name is Erica Carbone. I represent Seniors in Place. We are a senior home healthcare agency, and in this time, as you can imagine, we've been extremely busy helping our seniors stay at home while they're ailing. We provide certified health aides to Union, Essex, Morris, Bergen, and Passaic counties. And we can also now go back into the assisted livings if your mom or dad needs additional help in the nursing home. So please do reach out. We're here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Joe Steiner.
Joe Steiner, retired, helping out while Karen is on furlough and trying to make sure that we get as many programs operating in the chamber as we can.
Thanks, Joe. Jerry.
Hi, good morning. Not sure if you can hear me because I only have these brand new earphones and can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Jerry Yurkon. I am the Director of Operations for Summit Prep in Summit, which is an SAT and ACT preparation firm. We have been operating fully since our last day in the office was on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, but we've continued to keep our all of our tutors and all of our staff working remotely, and we're just looking to see, what we should be doing in order to get back on track for when we're in the office. It's kind of difficult for us because we're definitely a face-to-face firm with all of our students sitting about 12 inches away from their tutors, so it's a lot to kind of put together in our minds, but definitely the security side of it seems like something that we should be thinking about first as well. So I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And I can tell by the telephone number, Beth Welsh.
Good morning, everyone. Beth Welsh with Bassett Associates. Unfortunately, I don't have the video feature of Zoom, but I enjoy seeing all you folks. And we're their friendly landlord in downtown Summit.
Great. Thank you, Beth. And I can attest, having been her tenant for 25 years, if you want great landlord service, great properties, go talk with Beth. Thanks, Beth, for all you do for the community and Point View, too. Thank you. So before I'm going to introduce Marcella to intro our speaker, just a couple housekeeping. Our next First Friday will not be on July 4th weekend. It's actually going to be July 10th. I believe we do not yet have a speaker, so if you've got an exciting idea or would like to speak yourself, forward your recos to the powers to be. We're also going to try and have one in August. A lot of people aren't going to take their normal vacations, but your chamber is going to be adding value and continuing to hustle during the course of the summer. So we're going to have in the first Friday in August, another first Friday. The one in September will actually be the second Tuesday when we're going to be hearing from Overlook Medical Center, which is going to be fascinating given the pivotal great role they have played during these uncertain times. Finally, of course, our great executive director is on furlough. That would be Karen Hadley. We want to bring her back as soon as possible, but we can only do that if all of you and all your friends who are members and want to be members continue to pay your dues. So here's an advertisement to get on top of that. Send your money in so we can get back up to 100% energy as soon as possible. So with that, I'm going to unmute, or Joe will, Marcella Gencarelli, our former chair, to introduce this morning's speaker. Go for it.
Great. Good morning and thank you. And welcome everyone to the Suburban Chamber of Commerce First Friday Networking Breakfast. And it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Levine, attorney at Lindaberry, McCormick, Estabrook, and Cooper. I had watched his LinkedIn posts with respect to his extensive knowledge on cybersecurity, and he's considered an awesome expert. And Eric, take it away.
Thanks, Marcella. It's the first time I've been called an awesome expert, and I want to close the meeting right there. Thank you all for coming. Let me share my screen with you. And we will get started. Okay, let me get rid of my floating meeting controls. So, what we're going to talk about today is best practices during the COVID pandemic. And essentially, what that means is, what can we do to try to make your businesses more secure? Because cybersecurity was always an issue before COVID, but now working remotely has made things just a tad bit more difficult. Bear with me for 1 second. Okay. So how has COVID changed cybersecurity? Well, unfortunately, the old threats and the new threats are relatively similar, but the attack vector, so to speak, has changed. The focus of those people who want to take your information, your assets, your client data, has shifted a little bit. And by that, I mean, if you follow my cursor here, it used to be that hackers would attack us on a social engineering platform, preying on people's weaknesses, your inclinations to be part of a conversation. Attackers also went at you technically. They would find faults in your computer network, your defenses, and try to exploit them. And now they've also gone and started to attack things on a virtual basis because we're all working remotely. We're working on the web digitally more often than not. And what we're seeing is email, social engineering, phishing incidents are on the rise since COVID. And that's because hackers are smart and they prey on human nature. And what do we all want to know? Well, we all want to see the next email about what's going on with COVID. We're bombarded with pleas from charitable organizations, help people who are victimized by COVID, who've lost their jobs, people who are in supply shortages. Everybody here has probably received an email over the past 2 months talking about how to get masks, how to get disinfectant wipes, things like that. You also could have been receiving things like business email compromises, an email that appears like it's from somebody that you work with asking you to do something. And again, when you're not close to that person, it's a little bit harder for you to check. And we'll talk later on about things like ransomware and other attack approaches that hackers take. But the problem you have now is that remote access and teleworking may be here to stay. And there are many benefits to that, but the truth is, there are even bigger gaps in security now as a result of remote access. And then the last thing we'll talk about a little bit are new client paradigms. How have our clients and customers changed their way of thinking over the past 2 months, and how does that affect our businesses? So I'm going to turn now to a quick little hypothetical I put together. And if you have a Post-it and a pen, you can just jot a couple things down. And I'm going to take you through this hypothetical, but make some notes here if you can. It'll be a little bit of a quiz or a contest, so to speak, and see how many things you find troubling about this, and we'll revisit the hypothetical at the end. So the hypothetical is as follows. John's a salesman for ABC Corporation, and he's working from home due to the shelter in place and quarantine. So one day while John's working in his backyard on his daughter's laptop, he realizes that his Wi-Fi signal is really weak, slowing things down, but his neighbor's signal is pretty strong. So he hops on his neighbor's network, which isn't secured. While he's working, John gets an email from his CFO, which, by the way, is the first email he's ever personally gotten from the CFO. And the CFO asks him to buy disinfectant wipes for the office from this website that the CFO found. The CFO says to John, click on this link, use the company credit card, and buy the disinfectant wipes immediately because it's a great price and we want to make sure we have enough disinfectant wipes before we open the office. The CFO then also tells John to send him copies of the daily temperature testing logs that the company's been keeping for all of their essential workers who've been coming to the office. So in other words, essential workers who have been showing up have had their temperature taken to make sure they don't have a fever, and the company's been keeping those logs. So John purchases the wipes, he emails the temperature logs, and then he goes back to work on his monthly sales reports. But now he's pretty tired from all that's been going on, reviewing his clients' payment histories. So he takes his laptop while it's still running, puts it on his kitchen table, and he goes and he takes a nap. So take a couple of seconds and just jot down some notes for yourselves. I will tell you there are a number of things that are not good about this hypothetical. And if I have more time at the end before my hard stop, we can talk about it in some more detail. So moving on from the hypothetical, what are the best practices, the areas that we have to worry about? And I've broken them down into 4 areas. The first one is, what are the areas of vulnerability and the gaps in our security? This is something your company should always be concerned about, because there's an adage that the cybersecurity people tend to talk about. There are 2 types of companies, those that know they've been breached and those that don't know they've been breached but have. So there are always going to be gaps in cybersecurity. Nobody will tell you that there is a 100% cure from keeping your information secure if you do any work at all digitally. So we need to know where we're looking at to find the areas of trouble. Then we'll talk about how we can deal with remote accessing and teleworking. We can also deal with, dealing with employees, which is a very big important area for us to talk about because the employees are the front line of defense, but also an area of weakness. And then we'll talk a little bit about clients' new expectations, preparing for the next pandemic, and a couple of other considerations. And by the way, as you'll see from the presentation, all these areas tend to overlap. So it wouldn't be a good presentation by a lawyer if there wasn't the obligatory slide that basically says, here are some quotes for you to consider. But there are 2 that I always find particularly helpful. And the first one's been attributed to many people, but I have found it being attributed to Aristotle. And it says, the more you know you don't know. This has always been true for cybersecurity. The more everybody learns about what's out there, the more you realize, I don't know enough about this. People are telling me I should be careful with emails. Okay, now I know that. But now all of a sudden people talk about phishing scams, and people talk about network intrusions, and people talk about ransomware and things like that. I don't know anything about that. So the fact that you aren't aware of the overall issue is one thing, but the fact that you ultimately realize there's more that you could know empowers you. And that's where the Sir Francis Bacon quote comes in, knowledge is power. The truth is, there comes a point where you know enough that you can go out and get help from people who know more. And that makes a very big difference and is very empowering and can really steel your defenses. So when we're talking about vulnerability, we start with understanding. And what we're talking about here is having an overview as to what it is that you have and what you're trying to protect. And you start with the basics. And the basics are, what are your company's crown jewels? Meaning, what is the information that is most important to you? And what is it that people would be looking at to get from you? So for instance, is it your financial information? Is it your pricing? Is it your bank account information? That's one thing. How about health data? Do you keep information about the medical conditions of employees or customers? That has value to it. Could also be proprietary information. You know, you make the best chocolate chip cookies in the world and your recipe is online. Or you have bid specs or formulations, price formulations, customer informations. Before you can protect that information, you need to have an understanding as to what it is. So you really need to do a top-down analysis as to what sort of information do you maintain on your network. And then you also need to know where it is. And what I mean by that is it stored on a hard drive? Is it something that's cloud-based? Is it something that's on a server? Do you have multiple servers? There's something called data mapping, which is a process where your information technology department basically does an analysis of what's on each server and tells you where that information is, what information is contained where. And that becomes important because by separating certain types of information and perhaps segregating it from the outside world, you can protect yourself. For instance, maybe you have client payment information, credit card information, bank account routing information on one server. It may be that you don't have a need to have that server connected to the outside world, and by segregating that server, you're doing a good job of keeping that information private, or by using encryption technology, okay? So you need to understand not only what you have, but where is it located. Then there's something called the principle of least, principle of least privilege. And I'm talking about who has access to data and why. There are very few instances where every single member of an entity should have access to 100% of the information. And you need to have an understanding as to who in your organization has access to the information and why do they. So for instance, let's say you have a buildings manager, a facilities person. Well, does that person have access to your financial information? And if so, why do they have it? There are certain things that certain people might not need to have informational access to. And what you should do in an instance like that is make sure that that person's privilege, those informations are restricted. Maybe they don't have the right to view your emails. My assistant can review my emails. She can review my contact information, but nobody else can. Okay, so you need to understand who can get to the information and why. Next, figure out who's trying to gain access. Well, there's a whole list of people who could be trying to gain access to information, including your competitors. Could be, the rogue nation state trying to cripple our economy. It could be the hacker in his dorm room at some university, just doing it for kicks. So if you understand where people are coming from, you might be in a better position to try to protect your information from outside attacks. What is your plan for data recovery? Do you have backups? Do you have something that's in the cloud? If you don't, well, then it's time to start planning. And then the last thing we have to consider is how has your relationship changed with your customers? Has there been a shift in how people are doing business now that affects you? So for instance, are people ordering things remotely online as opposed to coming in? That might affect your ability to handle payment. And is there different types of billing information or information about where people are that are being transmitted to your company? All that you need to have an understanding so you can protect. So what do? You have to take an enterprise approach and map your resources from the top down. And this is really a team approach. This is something that you should be dealing with as the head of your company. You should be dealing with whoever deals with your technology, whoever deals with your HR department, if you have an HR department, and take a look from the resources top down. You also need to have an understanding as to what sorts of safeguards your vendors and service providers have, because your data protection system is only as good as the weakest link. And if you're doing work with people on the outside and their protections are not up to snuff, you have a problem. If you don't recall the Target data breach, that was one of the largest data breaches in history with tens of millions of dollars in damages that were suffered by Target. The reason why Target's system was breached was because there was an HVAC installer who accessed their system, and the HVAC installer's tablet was compromised because they didn't have adequate security. So you need to make sure that when you're dealing with a vendor, they're doing what you want them to do. Something that's a very easy and quick thing that you can do to help shore up your defenses, stay up to date with patches, antivirus software, and network testing. And what do I mean? Well, that's when Microsoft comes out and says, hey, we found a glitch in our system, you need to install this. Install it, don't wait. Make sure your antivirus software is up to date. If you don't have antivirus software, get some now and update it routinely. And do network testing. It is something that we recommend to our clients by having somebody come in and do an ethical hack, meaning they come in and they do what's known as a penetration test. They probe your system from the outside to try to find weaknesses. And they will find weaknesses. And when they do, close them up. It will always help you out. And then also, you need to have policies and procedures in place so that your people in your organization have an understanding as to what it is that you're doing to maintain the security and what it is that they have to do as part of the team. And this will be ongoing. So turning more to the specifics of remote access and teleworking, the problem we have here now is with the added convenience of being able to do work remotely, you have additional responsibilities and additional concerns. And you have three major concerns that I like to think about: your network concerns, your equipment concerns, and the human concerns. So the first thing you need to do when we're breaking all of this down is determine who's going to be working remotely. Some companies have people who are still working on site. Some people have everyone working remotely. Do a top-down census and figure out who's working from home and who's not. Figure out how the information or your network is being obtained. How are they getting into their network? For instance, at Lindaberry, we have a remote server that people use. We also have the attorneys are able to gain access by a different route. It's important to know where the people are coming in from, because you want to make sure that both of those, or I shouldn't say both, but any of those methods are secure, but also have an understanding as to how it's going to impact your efficiencies. For instance, if we have more people on our remote server than we would normally have when people are in the office, the server starts to slow down. And that means people may have trouble logging in, or they could get booted off. It's important to figure out how the access is going to be used so you can figure out your network efficiencies as well. What equipment is being used? Are people using their own laptops, or are they using company equipment? Personal electronic devices are never as secure as company, in my experience. So you need to know, is somebody using a company-issued laptop, or are they using their children's laptop? Could be a big problem. You also need to have a remote access policy. And the remote access policy tells people how it is they gain access from afar and what are the limitations. So it will talk about having things like the screens being time protected and they could lock out. It will talk about passwords. It will talk about shared devices, who can use their kids' equipment and who can't. And the policies have to be enforced. And you also need to, if you're using company equipment or providing it, you need to catalog that equipment, first of all, to keep track, to know who's got what. That's just smart from an accounting standpoint, and making sure that somebody doesn't walk off with your laptops. And you need to make sure that there are security measures in place, like antivirus software, screen locks, access controls, and something which is very important and something that we are implementing with our company-issued laptops, location GPS services, and the ability to remote wipe a computer. So if somebody leaves their laptop in the airport, we can locate it, and if it's out of our reach, we can remotely wipe the information off of it so that no one can take that data. So when we're talking about operational concerns, this goes back to the point I said a couple of slides ago. You need to first talk about your network capacity. And you all probably have dealt with this already in the past 2 months, but if you haven't, take a look at it now. Can your system handle working remotely on a full-time basis? Do you have the bandwidth? Check with your IT department to make sure, okay? Just purely from an operational standpoint, if you can't work remotely, then you have a problem, because remote working, teleworking, remote access is here to stay. So it may require changes to your infrastructure. But in doing so, you have to make sure that the way you access it is secured as well. Hopefully, many of you have heard the phrase dual factor authentication. Basically, it's when you have a second method of logging in or verifying login information, and everybody should do that with remote access. So for instance, anytime I was logging into our remote server, I got a push to my phone, and it basically said, are you remoting in? If so, click here. From the equipment standpoint, we have to make sure that if people are using personal devices, their personal devices have the same level of security in place that the company would. Because it may seem easy to jump on somebody else's personal device, but how do you know that that device has antivirus software, hasn't been affected with a virus itself? If you're going to start using things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, you have to understand how they work. For instance, is the Zoom meeting secure? Is it locked? Can you prevent people from Zoom bombing? when you go back to the main gallery page, if you can see it right now, you'll probably see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little green shield that says that we're using encryption. Well, if you want to make sure that your meetings are secure, for instance, if you're talking about, say, medical benefits for one of your employees, you need to make sure that the Zoom meeting is locked. You need to make sure that somebody isn't listening who you don't know. With regard to documents, we need to make sure that all of our documents are encrypted to the best that they can, and also that our methods of transmission are secure. Email is secure en route. It's encrypted when it goes from one destination to another. It's not encrypted when it's received unless you set that up. So you can set up methods of closing up documents where they're not able to be opened by the recipient unless they get a token or a password. It may seem like it's a little bit more work, but that protects you if you send an email to the wrong person. Because if it's encrypted, then the recipient won't be able to open it, and you'll be a little bit more secure. And then another thing to consider is if you're going to be giving company equipment to your employees, and even if not, you should recommend this, a password management software program, like a LastPass, like a Keeper. Something that will keep all the passwords locked and encrypted, so it's not written on a Post-it and attached to your computer. So keep in mind that while remote access is here to stay, it's not the end of physical files. Your office is still going to be in place. You're still going to have to make sure that your information is protected. Don't give up everything just for remote access. But also keep in mind that since we're working remotely, I say out of sight, out of mind, are we out of compliance? There are other issues with remote access that are very, very important. Like, for instance, are your employees still being trained the way they would? If you don't see them as often, how do you know they're keeping up good practices? How do you know what hours they're working? It could be wage and hour issues. The interaction that you have at the office isn't purely for social purposes. There are also benefits to it, such as oversight of people who are working at your office. When somebody clicks on the bad email, if you're in the office and IT tells you about this, you can run down and say, hey, what happened? Now when they're home, it takes a little bit longer, okay? And then you're always going to be stuck with the competing concerns of privacy versus productivity. So we want people to be working remotely. We want them to continue to be productive and efficient and generate revenue for our companies while they're out. But when they're using company devices, we need to make sure they have an understanding as to what their privacy rights are. They need to understand that there's also privacy rights of our customers. So you can be as productive as you can be, but you have to keep one eye open for privacy concerns and making sure that people are not accessing your information. So let's talk about the human component. And this is really the biggest conundrum we have here, because as I've noted here, the employees are the weakest link in our plan, but they're also the front line of defense. And that's because the general methods of hackers trying to take our information focus on our human nature. For instance, social engineering. It's people trying to deceive you to get your protected information. And that's from the email scam and the social media attacks, the false Facebook profile. It's the phone scam. It's the robocall from the IRS telling you that you owe back taxes. It's the fake call of the supposed kidnapper who says, I have your grandson, send me Bitcoins. We're all concerned about things like that, so we just don't ignore them. Okay, and it's something also as basic as physical interactions. You're on a plane, you're typing on a spreadsheet, and somebody in the seat behind you, caddy corner, looks over your shoulder. Maybe we don't see that so much now because no one's flying, but you got to be careful about that. How do you know that person is not a competitor? You also have to be careful from malware, where that's hackers putting malicious software programs onto your system to take control of it through emails. Very important, okay? Because what it does is it'll silently send the information back to the hacker. There's also phishing scams, and that's when hackers pretend to be someone or something else familiar to you to get victims to download the malware. That's the email from somebody who looks like a friend or is your boss. And then, of course, there's ransomware, which is cyber extortion. That's when somebody locks up your information and then they ask you to pay for it through Bitcoin or Google, Amazon gift cards, or they ruin your information, they lock your computer. We had all these problems before when we were all under one roof. We have them now even more so when we're spread out. So what can we do? First, you need to delegate authority to people to start to run with this program. And even if you're a company as small as 2 or 3 people, you should have somebody who's your de facto chief information security officer. This is the person who keeps an eye out for security. This is not just your IT person. They're not the same person. As a matter of fact, many people recommend that your IT person not be your chief information security officer, because if it turns out your security is subpar, and part of that is because of the information technology structure you set up, you don't want the person who set up that structure to have to be critical of themselves. It's tough. So you have to start with making sure you have somebody who's in charge. Then you need to implement mandatory training programs. You need to have meetings with your employees annually. Okay, just if for a reminder, do it over lunch. You can now do it over Zoom, as we now know. Go over the basics, what to look out for, what to be careful for, and here's what you do. And by the way, make attendance mandatory and document it. Everybody has to participate. And you tell people, what are we looking for? When you get emails, are there inconsistencies in the links? Do the email addresses look fishy? Everybody on the Zoom, I'm sure, has received an email from somebody and the address line too is blank. That should be a red flag, okay? I received one yesterday from a law firm, and it basically said, here's a link for you to download. I called up that law firm and I said, I think you've been hacked. I got this email from you, and in fact, I spoke with the person who supposedly authored the email. She was very nice. She says, no, I haven't been hacked, but I have had access problems with my email for the past 2 hours. I can't seem to get into it. I said, yeah, you've been hacked, okay? But the first link it was an email that I received, but it wasn't addressed to me. You want your employees to know, and the people you work with, to always ask themselves, why am I receiving this email? What's the reason? If they can't articulate one, don't open it, okay? The next question is, ask the worst case scenario. What happens if I open this and it's not the right thing? Am I gonna ruin the entire company? That little bit of skepticism may seem like it's too much, but in the moment that they hesitate in opening, it could help out, because they could say, you know what, I'm gonna call IT, or I'm gonna go to the cubicle next to me and ask my colleague, hey, did you get this? All right? Take the time, though, to do that. It's the breath before the action that saves you. You should also consider running simulated phishing attempts and document the results. There are actually free services that will do that. They will run an anonymous email blast to your company and see who opens up the information. We've done that multiple times before at my firm, and we've gone over the results with people. And by the way, you'd be surprised how many people say, oh, no, it wasn't me. I didn't open that up. And then I show them the information saying, no, it was you. And no reason to be upset, but let's talk about why you opened it up. And this last point is very important. You need to encourage disclosure. If somebody in your office clicks on the bad email or makes a mistake, you don't want them to hide. You don't want them to not tell you. Because if they tell you there's a problem, the sooner they tell you, the sooner you have a chance to correct it. If they don't tell you for weeks on end, you have a problem, and it will invariably get worse. So as part of our employee training, we even tell our employees, look, if you see somebody practicing bad cyber hygiene in the office, they're leaving their computer unattended, they're clicking on links left and right, and you don't want to be the person to drop the dime on them, so to speak, you can even report that anonymously, okay? There will be no retribution, but we need to know. Because if you make a mistake, that's one thing. If you make a mistake and you don't tell us, and 3 weeks later, all of our client information appears on the dark web, I've got a bigger problem. So it's important to encourage an open and honest environment for that sort of discussion. Other concerns, and I know I'm starting to run a little bit short on time. You have to understand now what your client's expectations are of remote work. Some people see an opportunity of remote work as expanding their client base. They hadn't thought. Maybe they can now service people in other states. That's great, but different jurisdictions have different privacy laws, and those privacy laws can really hurt you if you don't follow them. For instance, California has the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's one of the toughest privacy laws in the country. New Jersey's laws don't come anywhere close to it. So if you do work with people in California, you have to comply with that law. New York has a SHIELD Act. It's also more exacting than New Jersey. And if you do work with anybody in the European Union, you're subject to the GDPR. the general data protection regulations, and that is a whole nother world. Way too much to get into today, but if you realize you're doing that sort of work, you can then talk to a professional and say, hey, what do I need to do? There are certain consent requirements you need to get from your clients as to what you can do with their information. And if you have a website, you really should have a privacy notice telling your clients what you do with the information that you collect. And as I mentioned earlier, you also want to know what are the expectations and the practices of the people you do work with. So if you're shipping food, I believe one of the participants said she owns a spice store, and that's great. If you have somebody who's shipping your spices to your customers, do they have billing information? Do you give it to them? Do you know how their security is set up? And really ask yourself, have you planned for the worst? Have you ever sat down and said, okay, what happens if my entire computer system gets wiped out? How do I recreate my records? How do I know where my billing information is? What do I do? Ask yourself that question. Start to write down how you think you'd get back to being operational. Work with a team to put that plan in place, and you will be much, much more secure. And then there's the issue of insurance. And I could talk for days on insurance, but basically what I'll say is this. If you don't have a cyber insurance policy, you need to get one. It's critical. It could save your business. The average cost of a cyber breach is in the millions of dollars. It could crush a small business. If you have a policy, it can provide a little bit of a lifeline for you. And if you have a cyber policy in place right now, it's time for you to review it. And one of the main reasons why is, do you know whether or not that policy contemplated you working remotely? How does that policy define what your office is and what equipment is covered? Things may have changed. Actually, we know things have changed, so it's time for you to pull out your policy. So next slide, turning back to our hypothetical. This is just a little visual for you. Everything in yellow that I've quoted here is a problem, okay? And we'll go through the next slide, and we'll see how many of you did well with picking up on some of these problems. So here's the recap. Number one problem, working on his daughter's laptop. That's an unsecured device. John, we have no idea if there's any sort of password on it, if there's any sort of security, whether it's been infected while his daughter's playing Fortnite. So that's no-no number one. No-no number two, John using his neighbor's Wi-Fi, unsecured. Again, it leaves openings where hackers could come in and take your information. How about John getting the very first email ever from the CFO? Okay, that has all the hallmarks of a phishing attempt. Was John trained? If John was trained, he probably would have been a little bit more skeptical about getting that email from the CFO. How about using the company credit card on an unfamiliar site? Again, is that a standard practice for the company? I don't know, okay, as opposed to being billed for something in the ordinary course. Why does John have a company credit card anyway? Okay, he's in the sales department. I'm not sure why he would be purchasing. So from a company standpoint, maybe John shouldn't have had that information from the beginning. This one's a big one. Transfer of health information. If the company's taking people's temperatures and maintaining those records, are they now falling under HIPAA? Have they become compliant with a regulation which is really complicated and one that they may not realize that they're subject to? That transfer of information could expose the company to fines from the Department of Health and Human Services and could expose the company to a whole lot of litigation. And again, why does John have health information anyway? He's in the sales department. He's not in HR. He's not in management. Problematic. Unattended laptop. When John went to take his nap, he left the laptop running. You can't do that. Part of your remote access policy says when you're done working, shut it down. And then finally, client billing information on his personal laptop. Is that secure? Is that proprietary information that you don't want a competitor to get? Does it have payment terms? So there's about, I think, 9 things here. So I'm going to say if you got more than 4 of them, you're in pretty good shape. If you got all 9, you're doing real good with issue spotting. So that being said, I'm going to end my share screen, and then if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. And thank you for putting up with my quick speaking, trying to get this done within the time period. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
I'm going to unmute everybody so that we can do this. And then if you don't unmute, you'll know to deal with that. But yes, everybody should be unmuted now, but I don't see that happening. Let's see what goes on.
Eric, I have a question.
Yes.
A couple of things. One, is a smaller company, even though they may not have the security, is that safer from being a target of a scam or malware since they don't have as much information?
No, actually the smaller targets these days are the riper targets because they're less likely to have the infrastructure in place and less likely to have the resources to put up a fight. As a matter of fact, there's been a trend over recent years where hackers have been targeting smaller companies and asking for Bitcoin ransoms of like $5,000, okay? Because it's easier for a hacker to attack your company, freeze your 2 computers, shut you down, and say, okay, what are you going to do? Give me a couple of $1,000s. They'll then move to the next company and do that. And you're also less likely, statistically speaking, to have an insurance policy in place or to have the resources to fight. The truth of the matter is no target too small, no target too large. The bigger the company theoretically has a better infrastructure to fight. So that's why small and medium-sized businesses, you really need to take this seriously. And that's why we stress the employee training aspect, because it's not so much an ongoing cost, but if you do the employee training and you cut down the social engineering type of hacks and approaches there, those are the easiest ones for the hackers to use and are most prevalent. You cut those down, you protect yourself. And then you have to try to look at some point, even for a small company, to develop some sort of budget for cyber, because you will be attacked. There is nothing by any stretch that limits hackers to go for only big companies. Everybody's a target.
And you mentioned cyber insurance. Now, the presentation that you had, I know those are best practices, but are those required for your cyber insurance?
Well, it depends. It depends on the policy, but I can tell you that most of the best practices that I've incorporated normally comply with the practices that the insurance company wants to see. So, for instance, they'll say that as part of your insurance policy, you have to have certain policies in place, company policies. Do you have a remote access policy? Are you taking adequate safety measures? And if you don't take those adequate safety measures, they're going to say when you make a claim, you didn't meet the conditions of coverage here. You can't just have a gap in your defenses and then expect me to pay. So what I say is you start putting the practices in place before you go to get your policy. And then when you get the policy, you talk to the broker, you talk to the insurance company, and you say, okay, what sort of measures do you expect us to take? And they'll probably say antivirus software, employee training, data mapping, okay, use encryption, use dual factor authentication. And then every one of those things that they require you to use to get the coverage as part of your plan, you should feel a little bit better knowing that when the time comes, should you need them, you've checked off some of those boxes already. It's a good idea to follow your insurance plans, coverage conditions for cyber. Use that. If you don't have your own plan and you want to get a policy, use that as a starting point for what you should do. And then there's plenty of literature out there, and that's the things that I do. You know, we can help guide you through what else you need to do.
Eric, from your perspective, do you see that the cyber policies vary from carrier to carrier as far as coverages?
Absolutely. And you can actually negotiate sub coverages as well. Like, for instance, we have a policy with Lloyd's, and within our overall policy, we have a number of sub coverages. So, for instance, we were very concerned based on the size of our company and the nature of attacks we expect, more social engineering, okay, that it's more likely than not that we would be approached through that attack vector. So we had our coverage limits for social engineering at a higher level than, say, if we were hacked from a different way. And there are also different aspects of coverage which you can negotiate, such as, like, for instance, you need maybe business restoration. You need maybe social media type things. You might need, depending on the number of clients you have, identity theft resources from your insurance policy, but you might have different levels of it. So, for instance, a small company might not need $1 million of identity theft protection in their insurance policy. You might only need 500. You can negotiate that. Okay. The policies are becoming more prevalent. They were really cheap for a number of years. The prices are starting to go up. I just read something that said premiums are starting to creep up somewhere between 4 and 6%, but they're not unreasonable. And think about it this way. Let's say it costs you a couple $1,000s to get $1 million of cyber coverage, which may not be an awful lot depending on the size of your business. That's still an awful lot, though, more than you have. Because if you don't have a cyber policy and you get hacked, it's not going to be covered by your CGL policy. It's not going to be covered by your EPL policy. Okay? So it's important that, you go out and you quote multiple companies. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and get some sort of policy.
Thank you.
I think based upon timing to get you to court on time, we have time for about one more question.
Great program.
May. Unmute yourself. You're still muted. Here comes that little button. There
Okay,
she
good.
goes.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for the great info. Being in the information technology, I know these are valid points what you made. But quick question. I let my employees, some of my employees add into the website. We give remote access to change things and add things. And is that an okay? And also I'm directly connected to the bank for all the payment registrations. So is that safe, or any precautions I have to do?
Okay, two different concerns. We'll start with the easy one first. Remote accessing into banks generally should be good if you're using something that was developed by the bank. They are subject to a bunch of different laws, like the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and everything like that. They have a lot more requirements than you, so it generally should be secure, but you should have limitations on who can use that information. It shouldn't just be anyone, okay? You should be monitoring that account daily, if not weekly, to make sure there's no unusual activity. You should make sure that any communications you have with the bank don't really do so much by email, because you don't know who could be on the other end. It's still good to pick up the phone and talk with them. But I think you should be okay with that. What you want to be careful, though, is if you're ever making a transaction to the bank and you get a communication from the bank changing routing number or changing passwords or methodology by which you send money to the bank, red flag. Stop what you're doing. Call your relationship person at the bank and make sure it's from them. It's an offshoot of like the wire transfer. All of a sudden somebody says, instead of wiring it to my Valley account, send it to my TD account, here's the new information. Assume that's not real, okay? Second issue, you have people remotely changing your website. What if somebody hacks into their computer? They could change your website and put up pornographic material from afar. I'm not sure that I would want people to be changing from afar remotely, unless your IT people, you know your connections are secure, you have VPNs, you have all sorts of safeguards in there. And I think you also have to be careful to make sure you have a remote policy in place, and let the people who are changing it realize that if they're going to be accessing your website from their remote device, make sure their remote device is secured. Make sure they're using it only from a secured network. Because you don't want something to happen on, Friday night at 5 o'clock before you leave to go home, and all of a sudden you realize Monday morning, the next time you check your website, that it's got inappropriate conduct, inappropriate material on there that somebody didn't realize was posted from afar. So you may also want to figure out that if there's a way you can configure your website that when it's changed, it pushes out to you a notice, or to somebody else, so that you can know immediately, hey, this is what happened. Somebody added new content. I'm sure that there's a way to do that. There's got to be a software management program that could do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can do a couple more questions if anyone has.
Okay.
Jenny, you look like you were about to ask something, but you got to unmute yourself.
Our IT person couldn't be here today.
We just
Sure, and
lost
I don't
sound.
know what we have and what we don't have, but my question is, you had talked about, a couple of thousand, and the fact that this insurance has probably gone up, what, 4 to 6%, you said? Is a couple thousand 2,000 or more?
Well, again, it
And I
depends.
won't hold you to it.
Sure, and it depends obviously on the carrier. It depends on the level of coverage that you obtain. But that's why you can negotiate sublimits and you can lower certain levels.
Okay.
Again, it
We're
could
small.
be. I'm sorry?
We're small.
Well, I would say this. Small, understood. You're still a target. If there's a way you can find room in your budget, even if it's a couple $100,000. The way I say this to clients is, you have to ask yourself, imagine being hacked and imagine your finances being locked up.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have access to capital.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How then do you respond to a cyber attack? Your personal credit cards, your own money? Or if you have an insurance policy, even a small one, let's say it's not $1 million policy, let's say it's $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the policy, one of the aspects of the policy will be responding to a cyber breach. You pay for that coverage. So what happens these days, if you're a victim of a cyber breach, is your first call would normally be to like me, okay? You would have an attorney help you with the cyber breach. The next call is to your insurance company. And we say, hey, Lloyd's of London, Ginny was hacked. She's got breach response coverage, take over, okay? And then you've paid for somebody else to help take over the breach response, as well as hopefully reimburse you for your financials. So even a small policy can really be instrumental. I would say if you can stretch something in your budget to get coverage, try to find a way. If not, then it's really incumbent upon you to develop really, tight practices, policies, and train your employees, because unfortunately, statistically speaking, looking at the 17 or 18 bubbles we have here up on the screen, I would say out of the 17 or 18, probably 17 or 18 have some sort of virus crawling around their network that they don't realize, okay? And it may be innocuous, but it might not. So, quote.
Our bigger issue is I'm the sales manager of a real estate company. I'm dealing with independent contractors. Yeah. We're not dealing with employees. Mm-hmm. So, for years, we've basically, we require our people to use our, corporate, our email, but we have Google Docs and people are going in remotely and doing things. And we have competitors that they're doing business with their own personal emails. And we're like, well, fine, if you want to do that, go to the competitor, but you can't do that here. It's very difficult to rein that in.
It is, but it's a good practice. And you know what? If you're doing that and you're working with a lot of independent contractors, it's incumbent upon you to have the conversation with the contractors and to see what they're doing. If all of them are not doing anything at all to protect the cyber hygiene of their company, those are potential openings you have.
Well, and that's why we basically had to say, well, fine, if you can do it over there, then I guess you'll have to go there if you want to do that, because you can't do that here. So, okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I apologize. I've got to run. I've got a Zoom call with a judge coming up. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Roger knows how to get a hold of me, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcella.
And we will be hosting a Wind Down Wednesday this month. So stay tuned for dates and details.
Thank you, Marcella. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.